So the last really 10 years of Metro Boston, we've seen an incredible growth in what we call mobility as a service. That is not having a schedule or your own vehicle, but actually being able to call up mobility on your phone or through the computer and actually find access to a vehicle or to someone to carry you around, from Zipcar, which actually is almost 20 years old. The introduction of bikeshare, Doc's bikeshare in 2011 with Hubway, the same year that Uber arrived in Metro Boston. And then the introduction of different forms of car sharing, peer-to-peer car sharing with GetAround, the introduction of dockless bikes, where there's no station to put them in, but they can sort of live anywhere, rebranding of Hubway as Blue Bikes, and then just this year, the introduction of scooters as a pilot project. And so we can actually learn a lot about the way people are moving from the information that's provided by these systems if, and this is the big if and maybe the larger meaning, if we can have access to the data that's produced by them. So when we look at this, we sort of, I come at this with two big questions that we can try to examine with all this data that we've gotten from Lime. So one is the who, when, the where, and the why. Who's using the system? Where are they going? What kind of trips are they making? What trips are they, like, what sorts of modes are they not using? And sort of how does this fit into an ecosystem of transportation options that folks have in Metro Boston? And so what does it tell us about how we can make them better and more sustainable and various things like that? The other question is, what about the rest of us? What are all of these new forms of mobility doing to us, and what do they tell us about the systems that we're using right now? How are they adding to congestion? Are they allowing people to take, lower carbon trips? Are they clogging the streets? Are they, what are the other things they're doing for us? Can they pinpoint options, improvements that we can make that will actually make transportation better for everybody? So these are sort of two broad questions we might examine with this data. And we're fortunate in this with the Lime data in that the Lime as a provider was willing to engage with MAPC and all the regional partners to provide us with access to trip level data from the entire system that's been running over the last 18 months. While Lime was introduced as a pilot in 2017 in Malden, it was really officially launched as a regional service in early 2018. And so our study starts at the beginning of April 2018 and goes up till September of this year. Over those 18 months, we tabulated about 300,000 trips over the entire region, so 16 municipalities shown here. And I'm not going to name them all, but you can see them on the map. And what's really striking about this map is how concentrated some of the usage is. So these municipalities are colored by the number of trips in each city and town. So 300,000 trips, a quarter of those were in Malden. So people in Malden, they love their bike share. And also a lot of usage in the whole corridor from Malden, Chelsea, Everett, Winthrop, Arlington. To be clear about it, it's not a huge share of trips in period. So it still is really in its infancy, but something that's sort of has the potential to rapidly evolve. And with the information where we have actually coordinates of the start and the end of the trip, and also GPS waypoints along the way, we can get incredible detail, not just about the municipalities where it's going, but what parts of Malden and what parts of Winthrop or Arlington are creating more trips. So this is one of the data products we released today, which is grid cell information about the number of trips, destinations, or origins by these 250-meter grid cells, and so we can start to look at where trips are being produced and how they're spread around. So this allows us to get a much more fine-grained sense of the types of trips that are being made and where they're starting and where they're going to. So one of the things we found is that about 45% of trips start or end in what we would consider a city or town center, which actually only represent about 12% of the land area of the 16 municipalities and about 30% of the population and jobs. So heavily concentrated starting in these city and town centers. A quarter of them, though, end up in residential neighborhoods, generally fairly low density residential neighborhoods with names like Forest Grove Lane. So really spreading out, fanning out into places where you're not likely to catch a bus without walking for a ways, or you're going to have a hard time, waiting to get an Uber or something to take you out to those areas. So they are filling an important last mile niche, but not necessarily a last mile niche between transit and home, but really between town centers and home or other destinations. And one finding, I think, which was striking to all of us, is that only about 15% of trips start or end at an MBTA, rapid transit, commuter rail, or Silver Line station. So And part of this could be because of the municipalities that are adopted the system and it's not, they're not really in the core of the system, but there's quite a few stops, and that just doesn't seem to be a big part of what the system's being used for. So the other thing that we can get out of this is not just starts and stops, but we can actually use the GPS waypoints, 26.5 million of them, to actually map the routes that all of these riders took over the last 18 months and create a map unlike any map that Metro Boston has ever seen. Because you could go on the Strava website and find like, oh, there's a heat map of where everybody's riding, but these are people who opt in to, using an application to measure how fast they're riding and where they're going. Lime riders are not the same people who use Strava. Lime riders are regular people. 53% of them don't own a bike or haven't used it in the last month. So these are people who are not regular bikers who just like use the Lime today. They're people who are not, so they're sort of normal people, the kind of people we want to convert to using bikes if we want to have more sustainable transportation. So it actually tells us a lot about the kinds of choices and the kinds of conditions that people face when they choose to ride a bike. And the conditions they face, if they're like, I'll hop on a Lime bike right now, that's going to determine whether they become bikers or whether they get on it once and say, I'm not doing that again. I am not going to put myself in those conditions. So one of the things we did is we took all the street segments in Metro Boston and we categorized them using the information we had, which wasn't perfect, but it's a first pass to identify what we call low stress connections. So those are places where you'd let your 8-year-old child ride a bike on an off-road bike path, on a separated cycle track, or on a low volume residential street. We also identified moderate and high stress roads where maybe there's a bike lane, but it's not really separated from traffic, or maybe it's a street that doesn't really need a bike lane, but it's not, there is a fair amount of volume on there. Those would be considered moderate and high stress. And then we also identified what we consider very high stress roadways, multi-lane roads, no protected facilities, in some cases no facility at all. And you can look at these and laugh, but these are 3 of the busiest Lime roadways in the entire network. And I'm gonna talk about that. So we broke these down and we could classify then all the mileage that was traveled by Lime bike riders into one of these different categories. So low stress, this is good. 44% of the miles traveled on Lime bikes were on these low stress roadways. 38% were on moderate and high stress. And almost 1 out of every 5 miles traveled by a Lime bike rider over the last 18 months was on one of those very high stress roadways. And then we can then turn this into a regional map or a map of any part of the region, which actually zooms in, and I'll zoom in here and you can see this is categorized by the thickness is the number of trips on that particular roadway, and then the color is based on the stress level. So the red ones are those very high stress, green are the low stress, and you can see this is a zoom in of Malden, here, Everett, Chelsea. This is the Northern Strand Community Path, a low stress link that creates a great connection between Everett through Malden and all the way over to Revere and eventually into Lynn, we hope. Very, very popular because it provides this off-road connection. But then you can see Malden, remember, is a very, Lime is very popular, and a lot of these roadways in downtown Malden or leading to it don't really have the accommodations that are needed to support the volume of people who are there or protect the ones that are in. So what does that look like? This is one of the streets in downtown Malden. 6,000 Lime bikes, so almost 2% of the total traveled on this street. Very high volumes, no bike accommodations whatsoever, and I would definitely not let my child ride on that street unaccompanied. So, this is one where you could look at that and say, well, is anybody really riding on that? Should we build accommodations there? But the data show that yes, people are doing it. Here's another one. You can even see the type of traffic on this street, 1,200 Lime bike trips here. Again, another one, this is out of Newton, 1,200 trips here. So again, maybe not on the order of 2%, but a substantial number of trips. And this, for me, was the scariest one. This is Sweetser Circle in Everett. 3,000 Lime bike trips passing through Sweetser Circle on their way from Broadway to Wellington or across the Alfred Street Bridge. I looked at this, and I am a very confident bike rider, and this terrifies me, the notion that 3,000 people on Lime bikes are riding through here. And many people would look at this and say, well, no one would ride through Sweetser Circle, but people do. People do, and we need to protect them. We don't need to sort of think about building facilities because we might want to mode shift. We need to build the facilities who are riding through this facility, through this intersection right now and this rotary. Fortunately, the city of Everett is already working on this. this is what Sweetser Circle looks like today. We can do this. We can build this kind of infrastructure to support the people using their bikes to ride around, to get from home to the town center, to to the T, and do it in a way that's safe and convenient and promotes the kind of sustainable and equitable transportation we need in this region. But to plan for this, we don't just need good ideas, we also need access to the information about these systems. So we're really fortunate that Lime, some of representatives of whom are here tonight, have been very forthcoming with sharing this information. It's not common among these mobility as a service providers. The Uber is suing Los Angeles right now to prevent the release of exactly the kind of data which we use to do this sort of analysis. So we need to actually make sure that in this region and in this state, and I would argue across this nation, public agencies need to have access to that. We can take care of it. We can protect the privacy of the people who are using the system, but we can't plan for this kind of infrastructure transformation that we need unless we have that kind of data. We need it to guide these efforts. So if you'd like to read more, you can check out mapc.ma/firstmiles. And thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.